my name is Ken Seigneury. I'm acting chair of World Languages and Literatures. And before we get started, I would like to take a moment to thank the people who have made this possible. First and foremost, our former students who are out in the world teaching. And so that would be Sarah Simcue. We all remember, or some of us remember Sarah. Jasmine Ring as well. There's Jasmine. And then Sydney Hadziovic. Okay. And I would also like to thank Suzanne Norman from the PDP program. Very delighted to see Suzanne. I would like to thank Mark Degan, who is going to be our MC this evening. And then, of course, Elda Hadziovic, who has made it all possible in many different ways. So let me pass the floor over to Mark then, and welcome once again, everybody.
Hi, everybody, and welcome, and good afternoon. There's still a beautiful sun out there, so what the heck are you doing here? Well, I won't actually ask that question. Let me just foreground this by saying we were just having a little conversation amongst ourselves before we sort of expanded the room about just sort of, goals of world literature and the way that it speaks to education. And we were just thinking about the world in world literature and the way that it speaks to a larger realm than simply just, a sort of a global literary paradigm, that it also includes ideally the sorts of communities that are still to be discovered or recognized in their fullness. And in that sense, First Nations literatures, the kinds of literary sort of recollections that have always been there, but probably need more attention, the kinds of things that Black Lives Matter did when that came around, and suggesting again, not that we multiply the spires of literary study, but we start to see all literatures together. And in a sense, as students looking toward the nexus of literary study of some sort with the PDP program, as a stepping stone into a career in education. And again, I think the goals of education, in the moral sense of bringing communities together, is really also what we stand for within world literature, or world literatures, as in fact we say now. And so this event, I think, is just a useful and practical discussion through some graduates from our program and how they've navigated the PDP and how they've been able to create and enhance careers around their formation, moving out into the school world, teaching literatures and engaging students just with what literature makes possible, but also literature's position within education. And I think this is a noble enterprise, and I don't use that word lightly. And I think it is something that practically we're going to hear about. And that's what the nature of this evening is not here to be inspirational about, whatever world languages and literatures does. It's here to be a kind of practical glue, if you like, and perhaps an inspiration for folk who are interested in teaching as a possibility and the demands and the challenges of that beautiful career. So that's really sort of the essence of what's bringing us here. What we're going to do over the next hour or so is introduce some speakers who have been students in our program, who want to speak presumably just to the specifics of their adventure in creating a career out of what it is they did as an undergraduate, and then leading them through their professional accreditation through the PDP, and how that actually works. And perhaps they're going to offer some advice, I can't say, at the end of a series of speakers, which will in fact end with someone who you do want to get to know, the admissions and recruitment coordinator of pre-service professional, in teaching in the Faculty of Education. And that is obviously a place that your undergraduate work will lead towards, because obviously there are more applicants for the PDP than who actually are received into that program. And so again, this is of a practical nature as we move forward. And we will have a presentation from Suzanne Norman as well. And then we will open up, we'll turn off the recording, and we will open up a Q&A and just make a very democratic sort of space. We're also not going to have the chat function open until we close the recording, have just a very, very brief transition into the question and answer. Unless we're not a very large group, let's just be open about this. If you want to put a question into the chat, that's wonderful. Just put your hand up and I'll do my best to go through quickly and efficiently and just make sure we all get a chance to ask some questions about the sort of the practicalities and the motivations of individuals moving from literary into, or indeed, a desire to be an educator through the PDP and into the world of the career itself. Obviously, we're all getting rather used to Zoom. We will all endeavor to keep our microphones off until such time as we are invited to speak. So we the panel, so to speak, will keep our cameras on. You're welcome to stay as you are. It's always helpful and wonderful if you're comfortable to flick on your cameras as we come to the Q&A. I think that personal touch, because hey, we're all people here and we all have experiences. I think that's always a welcome thing to help open up a room and just kind of create that open and welcoming space. So we'll think about that as we move through here. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker, who is Jasmine Ring, who is in her 5th year of working as a teacher and teaching on call with the Surrey School District, which is close to World Literature's heart because we used to be headquartered at Surrey campus. And indeed, many students came from that jurisdiction, that rapidly growing part of the lower mainland here, and burgeoning and very diverse populations are always such a welcome on our campus here. Jasmine graduated in 2016 with a BA, a history major and a world literature minor, and completed a Master of Education with a focus on imaginative education at SFU in 2021. So Jasmine, you have about 10 minutes to speak to your experiences. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Mark. Yeah, I forgot to include in there, I did finish PDP 2017. So yeah, finished my degree, finished with World Lit and History, and then jumped right into PDP. So a quick transition, but I really enjoyed my 5 years of teaching. Even though I've chosen to stay on call, I have done some short and long-term coverages, so classes for upwards of 3 months, started and ended a semester, and really have had a chance to incorporate things that I learned in World Lit into my teaching, as well as my personal life. A little on the personal side for just a moment, and then I'll elaborate on the teaching aspect. Really, one of the big things I took from World Lit is the valuable communication skills that are developed both in our written form and an oral form. I learned to view the world differently from all kinds of perspectives, points of view, time periods, like really tied in sort of the social, cultural, and historical aspect behind everything that I was learning, which I felt was lacking in some of my non-World Lit courses. So I really felt like all my classes provided this broader, more enriching perspective that I think I felt was missing a lot of the time.
Let's move on to Sarah Simcue, who finished her BA in 2012 in world literature, minoring in curriculum and instruction, graduating in 2013 with a bachelor education in secondary education, which was enhanced and carried through her PDP at the secondary level. She currently teaches at Creekside Elementary in Surrey, all subjects at the grade 5 level. And with some humility, I'm going to ask her first to describe what it is to be the SEL lead for her school. Sarah.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Mark, for the intro. SEL is an initiative in education right now as an acronym for social emotional learning. So it's teaching kids basically like how to be good humans. So identifying their emotions, communicating those emotions, problem solving skills, things like this. So yeah, it's a cool new role that I have. In terms of World Lit, like Mark said, I originally thought I was going to end up in high school. So all of my education was focused there. And somehow I roundabout found my way to be in elementary, which I love, and I suggest everybody tries, because education is a wild beast, but as soon as you get into elementary, you find out it's even more wild, but in the best ways possible. And then I was kind of worried that World Lit, moving into elementary, that I wouldn't really get to be able to practice it. But I find that World Lit sort of just informs everything that I do. What was great about my World Lit courses, I had Ken and a couple other profs I'm not sure are still on staff right now, but just sort of how we interacted with Lit in our courses and in our classes is kind of how you teach. Open discussions, letting students communicate their learning in ways that suit them. I remember like creating art projects, and my friend would like make songs in response to the text we were reading. And like, these are the things that we do in elementary school all the time, and even in high school as well. And it really just has you attuned to the many views that you want to incorporate into our students' lives. I think the big thing that for me going into World Lit, what I wanted to do was avoid reading the English literary canon and being stuck there. And I feel like where education is moving right now is they are realizing that they were stuck in the English literary canon for elementary and high school level. So it's really been able to kind of enforce and underscore what I introduce my students to. What's great about education right now is you have a lot of choice, which can be a little bit overwhelming, but it also lets you incorporate what you know is important. And what what World Lit teaches us is that like a multitude of voices is important. So while I might not get to dive into text and translation in my grade 5 class, I can still position World Lit in my class by introducing picture books by different authors from different countries or with different backgrounds, all on the same subject. We talk about the personal stories that students have surrounding the same events that they share in their life. Like, we're all in grade 5, but how is one student's experiences with this event different than another student's based on, how their culture interprets this event or what they bring to it, what they bring to the table. A really great thing about education right now is something called the Core Competencies. So it's these different facets that we focus on in building a well-rounded student. And one of them is a positive personal and cultural identity. And what better way to do that than having a World Lit lens and honoring these kids and letting them see themselves in the books that we read, letting them understand that their voice is important, and showing them an example of them, an example of their culture, an example of something that they love in the texts in our classroom. Yeah, so I don't really have like a big culminating thing. I was like trying to like write all my thoughts today, but these are just kind of like all the things that come to mind when I think of like why World Lit is so great to have under your belt as an applicant to PDP or as a teacher. Is just you kind of come with this worldview that is really sort of where education is at right now, I find, and sort of what, at least once you work your way through the PDP program, what people are looking for to get hired on. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Sarah. I mean, I think you suggested something that certainly struck me powerfully, which is taking into account what students bring to the table and their own diversities and their own backgrounds into a negotiation with literature, right? And, obviously, aside from the educational outcomes of textual choice, within, a particular rubric of where we're going to go with this lesson, I think you spoke so nicely to that nexus of the reader and the reading, and then the voice who helps bring that through. If I may, let's try going back to Jasmine now. I've seen you, Jasmine. You haven't frozen as you were before. So let's try again.
All right.
And you had about 5 minutes left to your presentation, and you've had a chance perhaps to sort of reboot, I hope. And let's just hear from you again, please, about, you were just starting to open up about, the sort of the cosmopolitan realm of world literature when we lost you.
All right, I've moved as close to the router as possible, so I'm hoping. I was going to say, I don't teach a ton of English courses. I generally teach social studies, but when I have taught English, I feel really well prepared because of all the analysis we did in World Lit, because of the close reading of different elements of the text, the cultural background of the text. And I think, as Sarah was saying, with we have the interdisciplinary aspect of World Lit fits perfectly with our newer curriculum, with its cross-curricular approach, with pulling in things from various subject areas in your classroom. And so at the high school level, we're generally, courses are very separate from each other. So being able to pull in things from social studies into the English classroom, things from science into it, world literature really allows for that, because you can explore so many aspects of a text or the background behind it. I remember in one of my first World Lit courses, we studied Animal Farm. I found my copy, and it was really neat that when I taught English 12, that was, I spent just a couple days on it. We didn't go over the whole text. We were just sort of using it to propel one of the themes we were studying, but I pulled out my old notes and used the stuff that I learned in world literature to apply it to my teaching. And it worked really well. It fit perfectly. And it was very exciting to get to do that. But then from a social studies perspective, I incorporate literature all the time. World Lit really taught us to view the world and writing through different lenses, various perspectives. And teaching in Surrey, I have students from dozens of countries who have lived many different experiences. And I try to bring in, stories that will help what I'm teaching in history, help them make the personal connection, be more engaged. And World Lit has really allowed me to do that, because I'm always thinking that way, because that's how I was taught. So then that translates into my teaching as well. It also, we talked a lot about in World Lit how literature reflects the events that were taking place in society when the work was written. And my students have really enjoyed activities where there's silent reading novels or literature circle. We do a lot of activities where they do study that historical context. So even though we might be in a social studies classroom, world literature is still just as valuable in it. It's not limited to just going forward and teaching English courses, although it definitely fits there too. But I think it's neat to see that socials perspective. I know that we've, as Sarah mentioned with the core competencies, another aspect of the new curriculum are these big ideas for each grade level and subject area, which you'll hear lots about in PDP. They represent what students should understand at the completion of a course, and then you sort of build on them in further courses of the same topic. But I'm just going to read you the few for the English 12 curriculum. 1, the exploration of text and story deepens our understanding of diverse, complex ideas about identity, others, and the world. 2, texts are socially, culturally, geographically, and historically constructed. 3, language shapes ideas and influences others. And lastly, questioning what we hear, read, and view contributes to our ability to be educated and engaged citizens. All of those, I feel like World Lit addresses them perfectly. That could have been pulled from a description of a world literature course or the program as a whole. And so when I was looking at that earlier today, I thought, wow, it's as if Ken or Mark sat down and wrote the new curriculum and put that in there. So I think because of all this overlap, like my time in the World Lit program definitely set me up perfectly for a career in teaching.
Thanks so much for that, Jasmine. I mean, I admire the personal touch you brought to that as well. But I like the way that you just reminded us of the interdisciplinary aspect of world literature, because of course in the schools, you know, literature, socials, right? The humanities writ large might in fact be in your teaching basket. And I think that was wonderful how you brought that there. And indeed, the way that English is continually trying to steal a march on us by marching in our footsteps. And I think that is something, of course, that is the future of literary study is indeed world. And I think it is about diversity and otherness and the sorts of sort of geopolitical possibilities of those things, right, that impact just the beauty of literary art and literature, and in an interdisciplinary way allow us to bring in, you know, cinema or the illustrated novel and these different sort of media, different ways of expressing the human. We now have our third former World Lit student speaker, now an active professional, and that is Sydney Hadziovic, who is currently teaching English, social studies, and IB history. Remember the interdisciplinary comment that we just heard, right? At Simcue Secondary School in Delta. Sydney.
Hi. Okay, I took notes because I feel like I'm very old and this is like going back a long time for me to PDP. I also graduated like Sarah in 2012 with my BA in world literature. But I took a little different route. And so I want to spend a little bit of time talking about my journey to PDP because I didn't go straight into it. And I think there's a reason for that. So I'm going to explain it. Okay, so I always wanted to be a teacher. I knew I always wanted to be a teacher. But then World Lit changed that a little bit for me, and I'll explain that. I remember going to SFU with my dad when I was still in high school, and knowing that I wanted to be a teacher, and he took me into the education hallway. I remember the hallway. And this is back in the day when they used to post the data on the walls about how many people had applied and how many people got in, and how competitive it was. And that's what I took away from that visit with my dad to SFU, was how competitive it was to get into PDP. And I thought, well, I really, really want to be a teacher, so I'm going to do all that I can do. So I remember checking to see in the application process what would be what I needed to do to get into PDP. And this is one of the reasons. I also knew that I loved English because of my high school English teacher, that she was my inspiration for wanting to do this. But then I discovered world literature. I took World Literature 100 in the fall of 2007 with Dr. Paulo Horta. And I think that's like one of the first classes, one of the first years that it ran. And I just fell in love with it. I remember he showed Emily in class and I was like, this is literature. This is amazing. I can't believe this. I was exposed to translation studies, to theories that questioned why marginalized voices were not illuminated. And I just had never really considered how sheltered my experience with text had been before taking world literature. And I also learned how literature can reflect the world we live in so precisely, and that it is also capable of making change. And I think that's what really inspired me. So I ditched English, got on the world literature train, and I tried my best to participate in all that I could. A group of us went to Harvard University for the American Comparative Literature Association conference. I forget what year that was. And I remember thinking, wow, this is the life. I get to be around all of these conversations about literature and what it's capable of, and the different lenses we can look at it through, and what it can teach us about the world we live in. And so I thought, this is what I want to do with my life. And I wanted to be around those conversations. But of course, I was still doing my volunteering in my high school classroom so that I could get into PDP. So I applied to PDP the year that I graduated in 2012, and I did get in, and I just remember thinking, I'm not ready to be finished with these conversations that I'm having. And so I decided, instead of doing PDP, to go and do a master's degree. And so I applied all over, and I ended up settling on an MA in comparative literature at University College London in the UK. And so I had an incredible experience in London. I learned so much about myself. I learned a whole new education system. I learned a whole new way of citation guidelines that are like totally completely different than ours. I was able to continue working on my passion for children's literature, which had started while I was working with Dr. O at SFU. And I was looking at Nigerian children's stories, specifically Chinua Achebe. He wrote a few children's stories as a direct response to Rudyard Kipling's racist interpretations of African childhood. And I was just so fascinated by this. I also made lifelong friendships and built professional relationships with people at that university. So I'm so grateful for that experience. And then I thought, well, the next thing to do is to do a PhD. So I applied, and I ended up in Toronto starting a PhD in comparative literature there. I had a wonderful year. I started in 2015 there, and I continued to explore post-colonial literature, this time within the framework of Canada's colonial past. I looked generally at children's books written about the Indigenous experience in Canada, specifically residential schools. And again, I made many friends. And the cool thing about world literatures and comparative literatures is that the people that you meet doing these programs are studying all sorts of diverse things, and none of it is alike. It's all so different. And I think that's a very unique thing, and something we should not take for granted in world literatures. So it was at the end of my first year that I had two major revelations. First, what I liked most about what I was doing was the teaching part. I found myself, when I was in the classroom in the role of educator, I was TAing quite a bit there, and that's what I loved. That was my favorite part. And of course I was like, well, of course it was. I knew it was ever since I was little. But second, what I was wanting to do and what I was most moved to do was make changes to the way things were being taught in Canada. And this is the year that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's reports were initially being published. And so that's what I was thinking, this is what I'm moved to do. I need to go into our education system and teach this. So I decided to go back and do PDP after all, and I am so glad I did. I am so fulfilled every day by my job now. I started in 2017, and I've been working in Delta ever since I graduated. I did my practicum here and then got hired. And so I started as a TOC, where I also experienced the elementary school classroom, but did not have the same experience as Sarah did, and much preferred high school. And then I got a continuing position as an English and social studies teacher. I did have to teach business ed and coding in my first year, which was hilarious and awful. And I am not doing that anymore. And this year I've picked up IB history, which has continued to challenge me and teach me new things. So world literature has served me in a number of ways on my journey here and in my current position. In every social studies course I teach, I go against the grain a little bit and I teach a novel. I know that history is best learned when we understand the cultural representations that literary texts can provide. I taught a fascinating novel called Internment by Samira Ahmed in my social studies 10 course last semester. The themes of discrimination, politics, and internment matched perfectly with the curricular mandates of the Socials 10 course, and students were able to make critical connections to history through a fictional lens. And vice versa, when we study literature, we gain new insights and multiple dimensions of understanding when we look at historical context. Just today, for example, I finished studying the yellow wallpaper with my grade 11s. And adding historical context and literary lenses to this story gives it new dimension. The cross-curricular nature of the story, blending history, psychology, sociology, and literature, gives the story so many additional access points for students. And I really think that world literature highlights the fact that there are so many different ways of accessing a text. But I also think, and Sarah mentioned this as well, and this is probably the most important, world literature has set me up to be an open-minded teacher when it comes to my students. My classrooms are full of students who do not look like me, who speak multiple languages to my 1.5, and who come from such a diversity of backgrounds that I feel humbled and privileged every day. I love to ask my students about their stories, about texts from their cultures, and especially about translation. Our classroom flips when I put myself in the role of learner and sit alongside them or even in front of them with them as the educator. I learn so much from my students, more than I could ever hope to teach them. And this attitude to the world and to text and the connections between them is something I know I can thank world literature for.
Thank you very much, Sydney. Again, I mean, just the interdisciplinary aspect, bringing to the table your own passions, which were quite clear in your very natural presentation, and also the ethical drive behind the urge to teach and to be part of that cycle, right, of linking together the learner, the instructor, the material, just as a kind of cultural goal in itself to open those kinds of spaces. And you were also talking about the PDP as a kind of benchmark in your own development as a scholar and the way to think about that. And this is, I think, the perfect place now. And we're very fortunate to have Suzanne Norman with us, not least for you undergraduates, that she is the admissions and recruitment coordinator for the PDP program with the Faculty of Education at Simon Fraser University. So Suzanne, we'd love to hear from you and just some, what you have to say about what this program offers.
Great, thank you, Mark. So I'm going to start out just by, it was so great to hear all of your stories, and in many ways it speaks to the uniqueness of the PDP. So the SFU Teacher Education Program SFU is one of 8 universities that does teacher training in the province, and each university usually has more than one teacher education program. So SFU has 5, and UVic has, I think, 2 or 3, and same with UBC. So our program, it's been around for more than 50 years. It was one of the founding programs of SFU. So when the province decided to fund another university, the PDP was there right at the beginning in the Faculty of Education. But it's always been a unique community-based program. So we're looking for people who are part of the community, who are out there learning about other people, helping other people in many ways. And because BC is very much a multicultural society, I think World Lit fits in really well with many aspects of our program and the interdisciplinary crossover of taking what you learn in the classroom into the curriculum. So it's great that we get World Lit. The program PDP is currently a 16-month program. So it did change a few years ago to be 4 semesters, and it only has 1 intake a year. So that is the fall term. And the program has a unique learning module as well. So not only do we have the full-time faculty who work at SFU, but we bring in approximately 30 what we call faculty associates every year to help our student teachers become teachers. They are seconded teachers from the BC school system. So we might hire someone like Sydney, for example, to come work with us for somewhere between 2 to 5 years. And she would help our student teachers with the practicum component of their teacher training. So I like to say they're right off the front lines, helping our student teachers adjust to the curriculum. The curriculum is constantly changing in the province, and that is a challenge for teachers to stay on top of. And so I think when we bring in seconded teachers, they can really help our student teachers understand how to work with new curriculum, how to adjust to it, the challenges of it, but also the joys of teaching. So I love to hear that it sounds like the former students just really enjoy teaching, which is what we want to hear. It's just not a job, and it's just not a career. It's actually lifelong learning along with your students in the classroom. And so that's really what we speak to. So the program is 4 semesters long. And when we added the fourth semester, it did allow everyone who enters the PDP to exit with the Bachelor of Education as a second degree if they want. In the old days, people had to take a little bit extra coursework, but now if you do your summer, what we call professional coursework, course planning, you will get a minor and you will exit not only with a PDP certificate, but with the Bachelor of Education as a second degree, which many of our student teachers want. They want to get another credential on their resume. And I think it also helps if they want to go further into, let's say, working for the Ministry of Education, developing curriculum, things like that. Some of those positions ask for a Bachelor of Education specifically. I know that the title of this was World Lit in the high school, but I just want to point out that World Lit is also a great background to go into elementary school PDP. So elementary is kindergarten to grade 8, and some school districts do have middle schools, and with middle schools, they do start to divide up, I guess, the subjects a little bit, you know, with English and social studies and things like that, going to different teachers. I know that my kids had, when they got to middle school, they were going to 3 or 4 different classrooms, depending on what their teachers taught. Some taught more than one subject. So it does make a good background for that. And we do encourage people who want to be a teacher to get out into the classroom and volunteer or work with the age group and the subject you think you want to teach and see what it's like. And it's a good idea to try different levels. So even if someone knew they wanted to be a high school teacher, it's not a bad idea for them to try to get into maybe a grade 6 or 7 classroom to see if that's something they would like. And when people say they want to do elementary and they say, oh, I really want to do primary, you know, kindergarten, grade 1, they should also explore grade 3, 4, because until you're in that classroom, you don't know what it's going to be like, and you might really enjoy teaching another grade level. So getting out there and seeing if teaching for you is a key to getting into the PDP. So number 1, it lets you see what are the classrooms like, what's the curriculum like, what are the challenges of all the different grade levels and subjects, but also the teachers that you volunteer or work with make great recommenders for the program because they've seen you working in the classrooms with the curriculum, and they can really speak to whether you're ready for a teacher education program, specifically like the PDP. So we do encourage that. If you know you want to do high school, that's great. The World Lit major, if you come in with just the major, we would put you towards English type classrooms in the high schools. But we find a lot of people with World Lit have either a double major or sometimes like the joint major. I think your department has like joint with history and international studies, but sometimes people might do, they might do like phys ed as a minor, or maybe biology. Like we do get some really unusual combinations. So, you know, if you come in with 2 subjects, it does make you a little bit more flexible. Social studies is the most popular one. So if you do the combination with history or international studies, that's social studies, and there's some additional coursework that's on our website that you should make sure that you sort of work into your degree. But definitely people with World Lit are flexible once they get into the school system. Once you're certified to teach, you're certified to teach kindergarten to grade 12, any subject, which is how probably poor Sydney got put in the coding class. So, and my children I know also experienced teachers teaching classes, usually as a teacher on call for a short period of time, and having that frightened. I don't have a background in this, but they had enough critical thinking and could read the curriculum to get through. But I think the World Lit is really a good background to come in. I don't want to say it's better than English Lit, because many of the English students, we do notice, do have some World Lit courses, but the World Lit program that is at SFU is definitely unique. I don't think I've seen another program like it. We see a kind of close, but not quite there. So our program really is quite unique. And so I would encourage, if you're in World Lit, definitely try to take a breadth of classes. If there's an Indigenous literature class, great. Canadian Lit, literature from all around the world. We do get students from all around the world. So it's really bringing something extra to the classroom that an English literature major person would not. I'd also like to say it's a bit of a myth that everyone with an English degree applies to be a teacher. That's not our #1 applicant pool. So when Sydney was talking about us posting in the hallways in the olden days, the how many people applied and how many people got in and things like that, I mean, that must have just been crazy in the hallway, everyone swarming to see that information, but also it would be very intimidating. And I usually say to people, don't let the numbers frighten you, because someone will get into the program. And sometimes people don't get in the first time, but if they meet with us, they can make a better application for the next year. And if it's something you really want to do, don't let the numbers frighten you from applying. It has nothing to do with how many people apply. It's how good an application you put in. So, you know, I'm just thinking, if I put that information in our hallway now, what would happen? The hallway is very different. We renovated our building, by the way, Sydney, you can come back and visit. But we don't have a board that we could post that info, but it's definitely, you know, we get a lot of applicants. I won't deny that, but we do love to see the World Lit applicants, because I think they do bring something to the program. Specifically, we do have a module within the PDP. So the program, although it takes, let's say, 425 people into it, everyone isn't in one big classroom. People are actually in classrooms of about 34. So that's like a maximum class size usually. And one of those classes is called IPTM, which is short for the Indigenous Teacher Education Module. And so someone with a World Lit background might be very interested in being a part of that program, because we send 17 students to India and 17 students to Mexico every fall, although we haven't done it during the pandemic, but we're hoping to do it for 2023. I have to think that far ahead. And it's all about how to bring different ways of learning and thinking and into the classroom. And so, you know, I think you can also find within the PDP certain modules that might really speak to a background in World Lit. There's also a module, it's currently called IPTM, although I believe its name is going to be changing in the near future, but IPTM stands for the Indigenous Perspectives Teacher Education Module. And so people have spoken to that being one of the reasons that they wanted to go into World Lit. They wanted to read more about different cultures and people's experiences in the world and the impact it had on them. So that would be another module that might be of interest to some of the World Lit people. I'll just also say, you know, we do information sessions for the PDP twice a month. The info sessions are 45 minutes, so I can't obviously tell you everything you need to know about the PDP right now, but we are open to questions in a few minutes. So if you want to get a lot of detailed information, like how to start the application process, what we're looking for specifically on the applications, I definitely invite you to go to our website. You can sign up for an info session. They're currently on Zoom, which is great because it doesn't limit us into a classroom in the building, which we used to only have to cut it off at 40 because that's how many seats we had in the room. So it's great. That's the one good thing about Zoom is we can have 100 people from around the world. We get people from around the world on Zoom now come to learn about entering the PDP program. So I think that's all I had to say sort of about the admission process and things. I think if people have questions about being a teacher or how to gain admission into the program, it would be great probably to go to the questions.
Thanks so much, Suzanne. I mean, again, the practical information is super helpful for everybody, but I also just very much admired the way you delicately brought world literature into other programs on our campus and the kinds of segues that allows for young professionals in the education to be able to go into the world where you are tying together different disciplines, because that's just the reality of the school system. And I think that really spoke to something students really needed to hear. So I think before we open, the chat module, so you can put questions in that way, and hopefully before we turn on our cameras, if you so wish, that'd be wonderful. And we have some questions. I just want to thank very, very much our four speakers, Jasmine, Sarah, Sydney, and Suzanne Norman from Education, for giving their time to this little forum we're having. So I'm just thanking everybody